Hey guys, welcome to the special edition of Foresight TV. On a Thursday, I've got Lisa McCracken with me. We are going to be talking about all things NIC. I do want to start before we go into our intro is that I know I've got this weird background and weird angle and I'm not leaning forward as much. I'm at another conference in Los Angeles, and sometimes you have suboptimal choices when you're live streaming from a remote location like this. So we're going to have a great conversation here, but first this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Lisa, welcome to Foresight TV. Let's actually start with who you are so we have some context.
Who I am. All right. So I will answer in terms of work, title, all that fun stuff. So I'm the head of research and analytics with NIC. I've been serving in this role for about a year and a half, but this is my 25th year in the senior living industry.
Terrific. And we are going to be talking about the NIC Spring Conference that happens in what, 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks in San Diego?
Actually, less than that. I know I kept saying, oh, it's the first week of March, and like that seems so far away, but it's really not. It was 2 weeks from yesterday. So we are March 5th through 7th in wonderful San Diego, and that's always a favorite location. So yeah, less than 2 weeks, we will be there.
That's terrific. And I've still got to get both of my, I got registered, but I don't have either my flights or my hotel yet. And it's always a problem when it's close to home, you just leave it until the last minute. And but I'll have to get that done tomorrow. So I won't be able to do it today. So let's talk a little bit about the program. First off, what's the overall theme?
Yeah, so, so the one thing that I think is worth mentioning is that our spring conference is a little different than our fall conference. And I know you've been to, both of them before, Steve, but I do want to just, mention that obviously the core of NIC is we do a lot of education and what's the latest on the capital side of things and so forth. So there's some of that in there, but the spring conference definitely has more of a bent towards some of the healthcare, wellness, prevention elements and segments. So you absolutely see that reflected in this year's sessions and so forth. So, we're still hitting on a lot of the topics around whether it's middle market or active adult and so forth, but it's with that bent a little bit. So it's definitely, this focus, and it's also building on what we think is some pretty good momentum of where we are. So our opening general session is entitled, what a difference a year makes. So we're going to be doing a little bit of that outlook on senior housing capital growth and investment, and but a lot of the program definitely has that healthcare bent to it.
So I'm at another conference today, and there was a panel of operators, and when they opened it up, I asked this question, and so I'm going to actually throw it to you. So is senior living healthcare, or is it lifestyle, or what do you think?
So I've been whenever I've done in the past years ago, I would do some strategic planning sessions, and I would often throw that out, at different leadership retreats or board meetings. I'm like, are you either or, and can you be either or? Do you have to be both? I don't think it's an either or proposition. I mean, the reality is, even with an active adult, we are seeing this integration of the upstream, the wellness and prevention. And I'm sure I've heard Bob Kramer talk to you before, and maybe he's even been on this team where it's talked a lot about, health span, wealth span, rather than lifespan, and integrating that. And I think that's got to play regardless of whether we're talking active adult, independent living, certainly once you get into assisted living, memory care, and so forth. So, and I think we do need to pivot. I think, there's going to always be that care element. And we know that acuity is going up on the assisted living side of things, and senior housing that's historically been housing is more of some of the supportive services and care than has probably ever been. But at the same time, I think there is this increasing focus on that sort of prevention and wellness. So it's an interesting thing to beat up, and I'd be curious for your thoughts on that one. But I think it's a little bit of both. We do have a session on Friday morning. It's one of our innovation labs, which is like a smaller dig into some of these conversations and some small roundtable conversations on what is the future of independent living. And we're talking about this. Is this, independent living and a CCRC look different than in a rental? Then how's that different than active adult? And what does this mean? And this conversation comes into that a little bit for sure around the lifestyle piece. So I'm not copping out, but a little bit of both.
No, I actually do think it's a little bit of both. I think that the place where I really struggle with this is that we like to talk about sort of it as a lifestyle choice, as living your best chapters, again, coming back to this health span part. But I still think that, with perhaps the exception with CCRCs, that mostly what happens is people choose senior living when they have either cognitive decline or physical decline, and that maybe we are not as forthright about that. So I did a keynote a couple of weeks ago for a group of placement agents, and the Rachel took a clip of that and posted it on LinkedIn. And I talked about how, and I stole this straight from David Smith, but this idea that nobody ever calls a senior living community a divorce attorney or a brain surgeon unless they have a real need. And I had one person, most of the people agreed with me. I had one person push back and said, well, maybe not so much on independent living. But when I talk to people who sell independent living, even there, it's mostly because people are starting to see decline.
Yeah. I want to comment on some data we have. The NORC research that we've been doing over the last 2 years. And one of the first research studies that we did as part of that multi-part series was on frailty. And so we looked across everything from skilled nursing to assisted living, memory care to CCRCs and so forth. And for every single one of them, to your point, prior to move-in, there was a slight uptick in the frailty level. And that did hold true for independent living. Now, that uptick in frailty was a much greater uptick for an assisted living or a nursing, prior to move-in, compared to an independent living resident in CCRC. But there is often either a precipitating event for themselves or maybe a spouse, which you see on independent living side of things, or the anticipation of one. So there's, the independent living can vary so much. Some of them really look like active adult. Some independent living looks more like assisted living. But I don't disagree with your point there. But and this gets into that conversation of, are the lines being blurred between independent living and an active adult, and what are the differences there? But yeah, the continuum and distinction across that is always an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I the thing I sort of worry about, and I've been doing this for about 15 years now, and one of the things that humors me, and it's just human nature, it's not senior living, it's human optimism, right? Is that that we're always looking for the next best thing, right? So 15 years ago, it was memory care, and you couldn't build enough memory care. It was like printing money. And then we sort of went to assisted living sort of was at its heyday before I was doing this. And then we went to independent living was this amazing thing. And sort of right now we've got this active 55 plus. And I think they're all good products, right? So don't get me wrong, but I do think that they're actually all really hard work to do well, right?
Yeah, I don't think any of them are just, a walk in the park. They all take obviously commitment. There's different models and so forth. And, here at the end of the day, Steve, here's what I think. I think we're going to need, supportive housing, safe housing options, care, support across the board. The demographics are what they are. And again, you can put a label on it, and there's reasons we have those labels, and there's regulatory stuff and so forth. But, at the end of the day, people, are going to be looking for some, housing that maybe offers some security, some support, whether they need it then or think they may in the future. So, and you know, I think that there are options out there. You know, the one thing that we bring up often is obviously that, you know, we think about the affordability piece, and it's you know, once you go out of the, like, say, just housing, and even housing when you're doing 3 meals a day isn't, you know, costs money, but it's the affordability piece, and you know, candidly, that conversation even goes beyond our sector. I mean, the affordability of housing, I think it can be challenging, but when you need care, you know, some of the options get more limited and pretty quickly.
Yeah. So I agree with all that, and I mean, I think what's hard for me is that even as the industry, it's pretty confusing and it's pretty jumbled, right? And so you start thinking about what it's like for consumers. As you know, I've been a senior living consumer. I've talked a lot about that, and I sort of layered onto that is I just turned 70, which means that, of course, I'm now Medicare. I'm using a Medicare Advantage plan, and I've got more health stuff, not, you know, just stuff that comes with growing older, more tests and
Right.
more things and more doctor's appointments, and it's really confusing. I mean, it's just, and I'm, you know,
No doubt.
it's really confusing, and I keep wondering, is there a way, I'm sort of on a little tangent here, is there a way for senior living to somehow become the all things for all people, to become sort of the navigator, the guide in these areas? I don't know, thoughts?
No doubt it's difficult, you know, as I'm sure is the case for you, you know, myself, and actually my husband's in the industry too. We get calls often from people looking for advice, or, hey, I'm in this position with my mom or my dad or my aunt or uncle or myself, and can you help out? And it's just not always easy. And we've been in the industry for decades.
Yeah.
So it's even, you know, giving people advice, you know, you can help them break it down and so forth, but it's a lot to navigate. And I don't disagree. I mean, it's complicated. So it's, you know, so just navigating. I think that there's great opportunity on that care navigation. And actually, there's a few organizations out there in the senior living sector that do offer some of these care navigation. I mean, and you look at many situations now, the children are living across the country from their parents, and, you know, it's like, hey, can you just help us, you know, get through this? And I don't know how much of your audience is sort of, well, I guess we're all like either adult children or we know somebody, but like, and this is what I say to my parents too, just having a plan, right? Because, you know, like when there's an acute situation, that is not the time to be trying to figure it out. And, you know, it is complex. It's interesting. I had a conversation with someone at the ASHA conference, and now this was a potential new investor capital person that, you know, has not really been in the senior space before or whatever. And he's like, this is a little bit of like the wild, wild west. And I'm like, and I've heard that before. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He's like, well, there's so many players, and there's so many different and like just getting your arms around it. It's a lot to figure out is the point. You know, it's a complex market. So, yeah, I think that's a challenge for seniors for sure. And yeah. Because I mean, even, you know, especially if I stay in my home, yeah, do I get home health? Do I get home care? Do I move in somewhere? What's this all cost? Oh, and where can it get paid for by Medicare versus where I have to pay out of pocket? And yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, no, it's really difficult. And then you sort of, so this is what happens when you find this quiet space, and all of a sudden you got all this noise.
I've been there. Trust me, I've been there. I get it.
So I can't even see what is going on as somebody who's doing something. But anyway, so I apologize for the noise in the background. But I think that it is kind of Wild West, and of course, it's ultimately a local. It's such a local marketplace. At the NIC Fall Conference, there was a panel on the last day where they talked about human capital, and it was particularly about, I think there's a big discussion about how do you create employee incentives, and I really liked it. There were some really interesting conversations there, but I came away from it thinking that ultimately If you got a great executive director, you have no problems. And it almost doesn't matter what market it is. So you can have a great organization who has a terrible executive director and you're going to have terrible performance. You can have a pretty crummy organization and have a great executive director and have a great outcome in that building. And I think that maybe we don't spend we spend too much time talking about this high level stuff, and we really ought to be, the focus maybe ought to be, and I know it's not exactly Nick's purview, but maybe ought to be, how do we create more great executive directors?
Well, I've actually had some deep conversations with folks in the industry about this, and even with capital partners and owners that are like, are we looking at this wrong in terms of, also, you move up the hierarchy and then you go from like an ED to a regional, to a corporate, whatever it might be. And often like the pay goes according to that too. And you know what? Maybe when we get the really good executive director, we should be paying them a whole lot more than even maybe the regional folks. And I'm sure you've seen A Man on the Inside, because I think about the role of the woman that's the director in that series. It's the Netflix series, if you haven't seen it, with Ted Danson. So yeah, and I agree with what you're saying. An ED could make or break a community. But I think it's a little more complex than that, from where you can have an ED that excels at a certain community and does really well. And then you might think, let's say you're a big operator with, a lot of different communities, and you move them to another area that's maybe like a bigger community, smaller, more or less levels of living and opportunities there. And maybe they don't do as well. So I think there's that, a little bit of that too. I think, and I've, had some conversations with folks around that, of just, the right person for the right community. But I agree. I mean, the executive directors are just critical to this success. And you can have a sort of a tired older community that is highly occupied, and the staff and the residents love it. And it's not the shiniest penny on the block, but they got a killer ED. So yeah, I think, and we're actually working on, just a quick plug while you got me. And I'm glad you asked. So we've got this NIC Academy that we launched a little over a year ago with a lot of different classes. And actually we're working on a whole series for executive directors. And so, yeah, I think we're big believers in investing and really building capacity with those individuals. So yeah, I don't think there's many that would disagree with you and me on the importance of the EDs, but I'm not sure I always still see the structure and compensation followed.
Yeah, I think there are two problems. I think we don't do a really good job of training executive directors in terms of leadership functions and how to motivate people, how to think about that process. And perhaps we don't pay enough money. That maybe EDs ought to be making $300,000 a year or $400,000 a year, which sounds crazy expensive. But if they could get your building to 95 or 98% occupancy and low turnover, it probably would be a good investment, but it's really, really hard to get there from an operator standpoint, because it feels so risky.
Yeah. Well, and too, I mean, just even taking a bigger step backwards, there's not a clear pipeline. I know there's groups working on this, but there's not a clear pipeline into our industry. And I know, like the folks at the Vision Center are looking to really grow programs and things of that nature. But although observing a sea of change in this, generally our sector is not on the radar of a lot of folks, and maybe young students going into college. But it's interesting. And again, to repeat Bob Kramer again, he says, we're now a little bit on Broadway in terms of attention, and we have gotten more inquiries at NIC in the past 6 months from, whether it's media outlets or groups that it just would not have typically even thought of senior living and our sector. So I do think there's going to be greater awareness, which I think is a good thing. And, hopefully that'll, will increase, even some pipeline or just some energy in folks that are like, hey, that seems like a great sector to go into. And because, the shortage of EDs, of healthcare administrators, that's a real issue.
Yeah, it's a big problem, and I think as you touched on is the sort of the path to becoming an executive director. My guess is that 50, 60, maybe 70% of the executive directors that are out there today started as sales and marketing people, and often that's a good fit. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that path, but I do think there are people who would be really good executive directors who would not be great salespeople. And the question is how do those people get on the path? There's some big organizations, of course, that do have some training programs, but I think that's another big opportunity. So we've sort of gone way off track here. I want to actually drift back, and I want to talk a little bit about more of this healthcare and the relationship of healthcare and what you're going to be talking about. There was some discussion about that this morning, and I think that, to me, one of the big opportunities, particularly as we look at the affordability, is senior living has this tremendous ability to reduce healthcare costs to the systems, and yet we seem to have a very difficult time actually having these conversations between senior living and insurance companies and senior living and healthcare system organizations. So is that part of what we're going to be learning about?
Yeah, definitely. And we've got, we've got some great sessions actually that are breaking down some of those conversations, some that are very clearly talking about value-based care. What is that? What are some opportunities? The role of data. I mean, that is huge with it too, Steve, particularly when it comes to telling your story. Because as you mentioned, a lot of this is very local too. So you've got to be able to, forge those relationships locally and prove it. And that's where the data comes in. And I think we still have some, way to go, some ways to go with that. But, we're very big on focusing really on this value-based care. And we do have some health plans that will be participating in some of these conversations up on the main stage. And we've got some innovation labs devoted to this as well. So, and again, I would just remind listeners, and I think it's important to talk about too, that this is not just a conversation on the skilled nursing side of things. I think that's where some of the obvious stuff comes into play. When you think about, we're going to create our own, Medicare Advantage plan or whatever. But we know that, look at the MA plans. They've been struggling a little bit with losing some money even in recent years, and so they're always looking to reduce costs because this wave of boomers is coming, and it's a costly group. So, where are there potential partnerships to try to sort of bend that healthcare curve, that cost curve? And so with the studies that we've done, again, this is part of the body of work with NORC that I mentioned earlier.
So one of the things that it looks like Lisa has got a little bit of a connection problem there. One of the things that, okay, good. So Lisa, one of the statistics I heard recently was that Kaiser estimates that when one of their members goes from home and has a hospitalization of any type, it costs them $30,000. And so if senior living is tightly coupled and has, say, members who are in a senior living community, and we're doing good, really healthcare, basic preventative healthcare, and we can prevent that has huge value to a system like that. And I think that's where the opportunity is, and the challenge is how do we get those conversations going, and how do we figure out what the right economic incentives are. I had the head of the SCAN Foundation on Foresight TV 6 or 7 months ago, and they're doing some incentive payments, but honestly, it was so complex and so small amount of money for the amount of work that you had to do and track it. I'm just thinking that doesn't sound like very much fun.
Well, I mean, the reality is, from the research we've done, there are some communities that, without any incentive to do so, I mean, again, this is outside of the skilled nursing space. We're talking independent living, assisted living, memory care, that are saving, tens of thousands of dollars, in any given year for a particular Medicare beneficiary, which is significant. again, that's sort of without, I don't say without trying, but it's not like they're, necessarily part of an ECO network or, this and that. So there is opportunity there. And again, I think if you can have the data at the local level to support it and to be at the table to have these conversations, and that's going to be some of the programming and messaging at the conference too, because you can say, we've got a great story, we've got the information, we've got the data, but like, how do we get a seat at the table? That is something that we often hear is, these big health plans, like, what are we, a little blip? That is another conversation too around scale. I mean, if you've got some scale in a concentrated market with some healthcare providers, and health plans and folks, that's probably going to get you a bigger voice and a bigger seat at the table, but you've got to be able to tell your story. And we know there's something there because that's what our national data shows us. What we're trying to learn more about is those groups at the top. What are they doing that's unique and special? That way we've got a stronger playbook of how to sort of migrate to some of those best practices. So that's sort of the future stages of the research that we want to do. But the conversations that'll be had in San Diego for sure.
I'm really excited about this. I mean, I think in Sacramento, where I live, we've got two really big, actually, I guess 3 healthcare systems. We've got a Dignity, we've got the UC Davis, and then the Sutter Health. And they're big organizations, which means getting to even have a conversation with people at the top is really difficult. And I'm sympathetic with them because we're very dense with senior living, but I don't know what the count is. But when you look at sort of little regionals and large national, I wouldn't be surprised if there are 50 or 60 operators who have at least one building in the marketplace. And from a healthcare system, that becomes overwhelming. And so you might pick somebody in our market, not plugging anybody, but Oakmont's got this really big presence because they're a regional player. And, and then of course, does that squeeze everybody out? I mean, it's very complex. So I think that to be able to unpack this at the NIC could be huge for operators. It could make a huge difference in both their revenue models and in their occupancy.
Yeah. Well, and even when you see, some greater benefits coming on, through some of the MA plans for these sort of supplemental benefits, some of those are things that are already being provided by, some of these senior living organizations. So where, and now, we know we've got the guide program, which is still new, coming out. That's on the memory support side of things. But like, I think we are going to incrementally start to see some more things like that. At the end of the day, if the setting matters and I'm going to benefit because somebody's paying out of pocket to live where they do, there might be something I can do to, that's going to help me at the end of the day because I'm going to be paying out less for staying out of the hospital, and so forth. So there's something there for sure. We know it.
So let's talk. We've only got a couple of minutes. And one of the things I always like to talk about is just how to navigate NIC. I remember, I probably told you this story before. The first time I went, it was so intimidating. I was working for a vendor company. I had a colleague. He went the first day. He lived in the town where it was in Chicago. And he actually just basically threw away his ticket because it was so intimidating. He never came back. And I think it can be pretty intimidating. So you have some guides on how to navigate NIC if you're a first timer. Maybe you're not a first timer, but you don't feel like you're an insider.
Yeah, so a couple things with that. And, I know we've heard that before. And the spring is a little smaller than the fall, although you're going to be, there are about 2,000 of your closest friends. But, we do actually there's a bit of an orientation for those that are first timers. We've got we do some outreach and have a welcome for the first timers and so forth, just to understanding the lay of the land and so forth. And but I think it's important, some of it is how do I meet people or how do I get to make some of these connections. There is some of that opportunity through our app and to be able to see who's around. But I have found, and this is simple, but some of the best ways to make connections is you sit in a session and you never know who you're sitting beside, and you have up some of these conversations. And often those conversations lead to relationships. Same thing at the reception. So I wouldn't be shy about that. I wouldn't feel forced in, hey, I need to have, a dozen meetings and, be, really pushing to get them. I think some of it does just happen naturally over with time, but getting in those sessions, talking and connecting with people, you can build that pretty quickly. And the NIC staff were all around and are always willing to help. Some people come up and say, I'm a newbie, this is my first time, give me the lay of the land. So I think get in there, talk to the person you're sitting beside and learn a little bit more about them and share about yourself too.
Yeah, and I would just say, come see me, come say hello. I always welcome you in. If I'm in a group of people, I'll make sure you get introduced. And mostly people are real friendly. I will tell you that the first time I went, I set a goal to meet 100 people. And I would just walk up and say, hey, I'm Steve. And I set a goal to meet 100 people. And I would say 85% of the time, 90% of the time it went fine. And I made a bunch of new connections. And I will say that there are going to be some jerks. I mean, it's just the way life is, right? There are going to be people, and maybe they're just a jerk in real life, or maybe they're in the middle of some real intense conversation and they rightfully, it's not appropriate for you to be there, and you wouldn't know that, so no harm done. But courage is, you just got to step in and do it. Just, walk up.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Steve.
Yeah. Yep.
So
yeah, absolutely. I think that'll be a good return on people's investment. So we're excited to see everyone. I'm excited to see you. I can always count on you in the front row there, Steve, at our session. So
you bet. I'm the front row person. I always like to ask some questions, and it'll be a great informative session. The connections are terrific. The content is terrific. And I guess one other thing I would say is I know there are a lot of people who go to NIC, particularly who are veterans, who never go to content sessions. And you really miss meeting new people, and you miss learning things that will make your business better.
Yeah, I agree. Ditto. Yeah. And honestly, our numbers have been going up with our sessions, sort of each consecutive conference. And we're pretty proud of that and working hard. But yeah, some people are there in back-to-back meetings, but we want to, be able to have conversations and experts up on the stage where somebody's saying, what, I'm going to take a break for this hour and I want to go in the main stage session and hear what they have to say. So it's a great learning opportunity. It's not just about making connections. So I think, the successful attendee can find a little bit of both.
Yeah. So somebody just posted a comment, and I actually like that. Have you ever thought about, or maybe you do people get first timer badges? So
I should know the answer to that. That is a hard maybe. We have different colored lanyards, depending on whether you're an operator or a capital partner and so forth. So that is very possible, and I should know the answer to that, and I don't. I admit it. But I'm going to find that out, and I'll let you know, Steve. Maybe you can put.
Yeah, that would be really cool to just have a first timer badge up there. I want one. Because
maybe we might very well do that, because I know we're pretty attentive to those first timers.
Yeah. So anyway, Lisa, thank you very much. Great conversation. Thanks for indulging me when I'm in sort of suboptimal conditions. Jada from behind the scenes, thank you for producing this. You do an amazing job, and I'll see you in 2 weeks in sunny San Diego. Hold on for just a second, and we'll be back tomorrow for a regular Foresight and more great conversation.